Hello, Race Class listeners. This is John Feingold, your host. It's pretty wild out right now. I spent a lot of my time focused on attacks on civil rights and faculty freedom in the context of higher education. And just this past week, Texas Tech announced that students will be prohibited from doing research, self-directed study on anything having to do with gender identity and sexual orientation. It's really hard to imagine a more fraught, problematic attack on members of Texas Tech's own institution and the very premise of a university where we come together in order to teach and to learn and really to better understand the world. Though that is not the conversation for today's episode. Arnie and I asked a related but different question. We asked, what would David Duke do? How would the former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan run the Department of Justice? And we asked the question because we know he would do what the Trump administration is currently doing, which is to leverage the full power of the federal government to attack, to try to dismember and eliminate the organizations that shine light on extremist groups in the United States, including the Southern Poverty Law Center that has been at the front line for decades, exposing extremist groups like the KKK. And just last week, the Department of Justice indicted the Southern Poverty Law Center. We also chat a little bit about IBM settling a frivolous lawsuit again against the Department of Justice. And I hope you join and I hope you enjoy.
Hi, this is Arnie Arnesen, and this is part 2 of the Thursday edition of The Attitude with Arnie Arnesen and producers Dave Scott and Stephanie Collins. You know the drill. We're recording on an overcast Wednesday morning. I believe it's also Earth Day. If it is the last Thursday of the month, it's Race Class with Jonathan Feingold, a professor of law at Boston University. We always tell you this story. Legislation restricting the teaching of race and racism in public schools and government entities has spread across the country. In an effort to respond, BU Law Professor Jonathan Feingold and Arnie Arnesen are offering Race Class, a once-a-month course conversation where listeners can hear what it's like to approach race and racism from a place of curiosity and history, rather than fear and anxiety. And as Jonathan described the foundational purpose of Race Class, he's noted, quote, "We know race matters. Part of this project is to make sense of what that means." Welcome back to the program. Years after we first started, Jonathan, we're still hanging out together. Nobody would have believed it. Nobody would have believed it. But thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks, Arnie. Nice to be with you.
So I asked you, what did you want to talk about? And you said, I want to talk about the Southern Poverty Law Center. And of course, many of us have heard that they are now being sued by the administration. So as I Googled that story, I came up with a Substack by someone whose name people will recognize because she's on MS Now all the time. And I believe she's even on CNN and whatever. Her name is Joyce Vance. All right. And Joyce Vance wrote a Substack. And the title of her Substack, Jonathan, is Investigating the Good Guys. All right. DOJ claims the Southern Poverty Law Center was, quote, paying off the KKK. The group's track record and common sense suggest otherwise. And please forgive me, but I'm going to share some of her Substack with the audience because this is not only a story she writes about, these are people she knows. Now listen to this. The Southern Poverty Law Center was founded in 1971 in Montgomery, Alabama, by a lawyer named Morris Dees, who, by the way, I've had an opportunity to have met. His goal was to protect civil rights and combat hate groups. He went about it with precision, using a civil lawsuit to bankrupt and cripple the KKK in 1981, when other approaches, including criminal prosecution, failed to make headway. So it makes sense that Kash Patel's FBI would sever all ties with them, which happened last October. Until then, the Southern Poverty Law Center's insightful intelligence product on domestic hate groups had been shared with the FBI and was widely viewed as being incredibly helpful. They had access to information other groups, even law enforcement, didn't have, as they committed people and resources to programs like Klan Watch. Ah, but apparently that wasn't enough. Tuesday morning, the interim president of the Southern Poverty Law Center, Brian Fair, quote, listen to this, full disclosure, my colleague at the University of Alabama School of Law, close quote, announced that the center was under criminal investigation. Then, in a 5:30 p.m. press conference, DOJ announced it had indicted the Southern Poverty Law Center. Kash Patel called it a massive sweeping indictment charging fraud. The claim is that the Southern Poverty Law Center was paying the leadership of hate groups it was keeping track of, and it was defrauding its donors. He called it a decade-long, multi-million dollar fraud using the banking system and a series of fictitious entities to perpetuate the fraud. Only the center is charged. And she goes on and on and on. And there's such irony in all of this, and she includes what the indictment looks like. And of course, that fact that nobody is mentioned is probably suggests that they don't really have a lot of quality information about what they're charging because there's no one specific here. But the irony is that this is an organization that embraces Nazis, and I mean the Trump administration, that, supports Christian nationalists, that is, I mean, when you look at the corruption and the individuals that they are embracing that basically are a form of insurrectionists, and then to go after an organization that has one of the most amazing track records of really sort of not only following these groups and exposing these groups. I asked you, what did you want to talk about? And you said, I want to talk about this. So, through the lens of race class, Jonathan Feingold, why were you choosing this? I can sort of imagine it, but the timing is so incredible. It happened just this week. And what do I have? I have you on the air today. So, let's talk a little bit about this decision and what is your reaction?
So one of the reasons why I thought it made sense to talk about this is because over the past few conversations we've had, we have been picking at different parts of the Trump administration where if you look at what the federal government is doing with clear eyes, you observe a project of resegregation and a project that is designed to renaturalize the more rigid racial and gendered hierarchies that define this country pre mid 20th century civil rights. And what you also see is that the leaders of hate groups are now in charge of the federal government. And so one way to think about the SPLC indictment in conjunction with and so I'm going to connect it to something else that happened recently, but broader efforts on the part of the federal government to resegregate key sites of U.S. society, and really specifically through the purging of black officials. And so we saw this in the military recently, the sort of
Yes.
intervention by Hegseth to prevent the promotions of black officials in the military. But like if you were to imagine giving David Duke the reins in DOJ, what would he do? Well, one thing that he would do is he would go after every company, every corporate entity in the country that was trying to racially integrate its workforce. So you would do that. But what you would also do is you would try to handicap the watchdog organizations, the groups that monitor the Klan. And SPLC is really in a league of its own with respect to the work that it does to simply shine light on some of the most hateful and dangerous formations in the country,
Right.
many of which have direct links to the Trump administration, the Republican Party, and state officials throughout the post-Confederate South. And so I'm just
Let
gonna,
me just stop you here for one quick second. I want you to write the article. How would David Duke do anything differently than the Trump administration? No, no, seriously. I mean, when you said that, it was like a light bulb moment. What would he do differently? Not a thing, Jonathan. Vouchers, the Department of Education going after higher ed, going after DEI, going after the military, white Christian nationalism, embracing these alcoholic drunks, basically, who don't do anything to protect us, but are making us less secure. But the choices that they are making, not only in the wars and how they're spending the money, but who they're depriving of essential healthcare dollars or food dollars, that and they're targeting people of color, they're targeting the poor, they're targeting all the people they've chosen to marginalize, that David Duke would be celebrating. I mean, I think in so many ways, given what you said, that really is the question. Is this Trump or David Duke? And what would they have done differently? Not a thing, Jonathan, not a thing. Oh
and
my God.
and I think so. I wish I had time to write the piece. If I do, I will. Victor Ray, maybe I'll shoot him a text.
Yeah,
So Victor's also written a number of pieces. Him, um, Adam Serwer at The Atlantic,
right.
Jamal Bowie,
Yep.
like different folks have been telling this story over the past few years. And I think so. One response might be, John, you're being partisan. You should be more
No.
precise. But I think that's I think that that's actually that reflex or that instinct is part of the challenge that we have, and that actually prevents us from seeing with clear eyes what's happening here. It does turn out that and this is not to defend Democrats or Democratic leadership. There's all sorts of ways in which the core of the Democratic Party is, fraught in all sorts of ways. But the Republican Party, the modern GOP right now, is a segregationist enterprise.
Yeah.
It is. It's anti-democratic, like what just happened in Virginia, where you had voters decide to engage in a particular form of gerrymandering in order to create more Democratic House seats in response to the GOP, starting in Texas and then moving throughout the country, endeavoring to just limit the ability of regular people to actually decide who rules in this country in order to manufacture a just a mode of just social political ordering whereby the decisions are not made based on actual wants of voters. But then just circling back to what would David Duke do? I do think it's worth asking it in that way because it's actually
Yes.
hard for me to see what he would do differently than what this administration is doing. But
Absolutely. Go
I
on.
also think it's important to, ask, well, who are the groups that SPLC tracks? Because doing that then makes it more understandable why the DOJ is bringing obviously frivolous indictments, bad faith indictments against this organization. And there are many. People should go in the.
There are 11 there are 11 counts, and just really quickly, just let me make sure people know what the accusation is as we're
Yeah.
having this conversation. This, everyone, is from The Guardian. They accuse officials at the SPLC of lying to donors when they told them that the money that would be used would be to dismantle violent extremist groups, when it was allegedly being used to pay leaders in those very violent groups. Prosecutors say the organization also lied to banks about who owned the entities. Quote, if it is very odd to charge a corporate entity with these crimes, said Andrew Tessman, a former federal prosecutor who handled financial fraud cases. To prove wire fraud, you have to show that the defendant had intent to defraud. That's hard to do even when you're talking about an individual person. To establish that an entire corporate entity had intent to defraud seems, well, exceptionally difficult. Same goes for bank fraud, difficult crime to prove. And then he goes on to say, I don't think they can prove their case at trial. But let me remind everyone, when you want to get into the mob or the mafia or the KKK, you usually have what? Paid informants. The government does it. It turns out the Southern Poverty Law Center does it. It is a common practice. The Russians do it. All right. And suddenly what they do, as in the government itself, because the Southern Poverty Law Center is doing the same thing and sharing it, Jonathan, with the government. And sharing it with the government. It's not like they're holding tight to this and using it against the government. They're sharing it with the government. And now what? They're bringing them up on charges for exactly the same behavior. It is just
And
both shocking and bizarre.
so, though it's not, it's neither shocking nor bizarre
Okay.
because if David Duke is running the DOJ, if
Right.
David Duke is running the prosecutorial arm of the federal government, he is going to leverage that in order to shake down the organizations that shine a light on the Klan.
Right.
And because again, it's not about ultimately prevailing in some, jury trial happening at some point. It's about exacting a cost in the present and fear and intimidation by weaponizing the full force and power of the federal government to go after political enemies, political opponents. But again, so who is it that SPLC is monitoring? Well, groups that you've probably talked about many times before. So Moms for Liberty.
Yes.
Moms for Liberty has a nice profile. PragerU. PragerU has a nice profile. So both Moms for Liberty and PragerU, two incredibly well-funded organizations that have played a huge role in attacking public schools, in attacking inclusionary programs, in furthering projects designed to force students to be subject to indoctrination in school because they're denied a sort of critical, robust, and truthful educational experience, but then also groups like Turning Point USA. And so
Yeah.
SPLC has been tracking, at least since 2018 or so, maybe before, how Turning Point USA, a group that Charlie Kirk founded, at first was too far right for the Republican Party, but then as Trump ascended in the party, became more mainstreamed.
Right.
And SPLC, in ways that Democrats failed to do after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, that the mainstream media often fails to do, was simply identifying the sort of politics and projects that Turning Point USA has long been engaged in, which are deeply, just at their core, bigoted.
Well, and
And
you mentioned Texas. I just want to go back to Texas because in a lot of ways, while we're in this gerrymandering fight in Virginia, because of what Donald Trump demanded of Texas, and of course, let's remember that what Texas did with its gerrymander is it didn't go to the voters for permission. They went to their sort of MAGA Republican legislature and they redistricted in order to make Donald Trump happy because he knew he couldn't win the vote, so he had to jigger the vote. He had to like reconstruct it in order for him to have an advantage because he can't win on a level playing field. But this is the same state that finally embraced vouchers. And they included religious vouchers, Jonathan. But guess what? Religious vouchers were not going to be recognized and approved. Vouchers to go to religious schools that had to be related to the Islamic faith. Okay. So although religion, technically, even though I hate vouchers and it's about segregation, both by color and by class and by religion, they went after the Islamic schools and said, no, you can't get our public dollars. And then they put something on the ballot. And what was on the ballot? On the ballot was a referendum against the imposition of Sharia law in Texas. There is no imposition of Sharia law. No one has ever done it. But once again, targeting groups that the SPLC would be going after, saying, look what they are doing, look what they are undermining. This is a group that is undermining the fabric of America. And now, what is this administration doing under David Duke a la Donald Trump, but going after them? Because guess what? They've embraced exactly the groups the Southern Poverty Law Center is trying to expose.
Embraced, and they're enmeshed in them. And so
Yes,
it's Trump, it's also Todd Blanche,
yes.
whose profile has been raised recently in the DOJ. And
Oh, God.
again, so circling back also to, so what would the Klan be doing if the Klan um, had control of the DOJ? Well, they would be using whatever tools they had to kneecap the groups that monitor them.
Right.
They would also engage in the same sort of coercive tactics with educational institutions and with corporate entities who are doing really the bare minimum to try to integrate their workforce, to minimize the degree to which biases, stereotypes are sort of shaping outcomes, are creating either positive or negative employment environments. And we have a very recent example of that. And so Todd Blanche, what is Todd Blanche's role right now?
Well, isn't he the acting FBI director?
No, no,
I mean,
no. So
acting
Pastor tells
DOJ?
that no. So Todd Blanche, he might be acting, not acting AG, but he was in an associate. Let's see, Todd. I've got it
Well,
right
I don't know.
here.
I mean, everyone, the deck chairs are moving, so I know that he's definitely involved in this. But isn't he
Oh, so
acting?
he's so
He's
acting. So
Bondi,
yeah, he's acting
acting attorney
AG,
general. Okay,
acting
yeah,
attorney
that's what I
general.
thought. All right, okay,
So
good.
yeah, and so he's the one who got all the nice quotes with respect to the SPLC indictment. He also is featured in a recent press release that the Department of Justice put out regarding a settlement it entered with IBM. And so this was April 10th. So this
Okay,
is
okay.
almost 2 weeks ago. And DOJ announced a settlement in which IBM pays $17 million to quote unquote resolve allegations of discrimination through illegal DEI practices.
To
So if you
illegal DEI practices?
quote unquote illegal DEI, and so if you remember
Oh my
back to
God.
about a year ago, Todd Blanche sends out this memo
Yeah.
announcing this quote unquote civil fraud initiative or civil rights fraud initiative, something along the, what is it? Yeah, it's the Civil Rights Fraud Initiative from May
Okay.
19th, 2025. And in it, he gestures to the plan to stand up this initiative, this group that is going to use the False Claims Act, this
Mm-hmm.
law
Mm-hmm.
that is relatively unfamiliar to the DOJ civil rights space, and they're going to use it in order to put pressure on all entities that receive that are covered by civil rights law, Title 4, 6,
Yeah.
9, and
Yeah.
7 as well. Um, when they, quote unquote, engage in quote unquote illegal DEI, which is a made up term. It means nothing.
I know.
Um,
I don't
as a
even know what
matter
that. I
of
mean, I mean, so what? But the fact that they have hired black people means that they violated this false definition of DEI. How do you even prove that? Like,
Well,
what
so
is it to
but
prove it?
so the point is, so part of the point is that you don't have to prove it if you have it because the threat is this. And so with the False Claims Act, you can receive treble damages. So the amount of sort of financial cost that
Okay.
an entity that is found liable can
Okay.
incur is far more than they normally would. And so you have these situations in which you have a company like IBM. Now,
Oh my God.
that is doing very basic anti-discrimination civil rights work in
Hmm.
order to integrate its workforce.
Hmm.
So think back to 2020, IBM's like, oh, it turns out there's all these ways in which racial biases, gender biases are, part of the reason why people of color, women are not ascending through,
Right.
at the same rate as people who are white and
Right.
people who are
Right.
male.
They have this stereotype because you're this color or you're this race or you're this whatever, you cannot accomplish this task. Well, guess what? That's a form of discrimination.
So yeah, so there's all sorts of different ways in which we'll just use the term biases, become embedded within, just company practice, company culture, company policy in ways that lead to racially and gender sort of disparities in terms of outcomes. And so if you want a fair playing field, you have to take that into account. So IBM, my guess is, was doing some very, very modest work in order to try to create more fair, more neutral hiring practices, promotion practices, to try to create um, a more equal working environment. And then they get a complaint brought against them or some investigation started against them from the DOJ, where the DOJ just throws out words. It
Yeah, I
says you're
know.
engaging in illegal DEI, and we're going to and we're also bringing a False Claims Act claim here so that you are going to face these ratcheted up financial consequences. For IBM, though, $17 million, I would
That's
just
pocket change. It's pocket
it's
change. Yeah,
nothing. And so for them, it's this business decision
right.
to settle. But it's another instance in which the federal government does not need to be right. It
No,
it does like it's not that IBM is doing something illegal. It's that IBM is engaged in lawful integrationist practice.
right.
It's doing something that is lawful and it is designed to desegregate. And so what would David Duke do?
They
If
would do.
David Duke would, he would
Oh God.
prevent institutions from doing things that are legal and are designed to desegregate the company, the domain, the
Oh
sector.
God. Oh God. So the article at The Guardian, Jonathan, ends this way. Today, the federal government has been weaponized to dismantle the rights of our nation's most vulnerable people and any organization like ours that stands in the breach. This is fair. Who says this? We will vigorously defend ourselves, our staff, our work. We will continue to fight hate and will continue to seek a safer and more just world. Close quote. But in a statement defending the SPLC, Anthony Romero, the executive director of the ACLU, assailed the Justice Department's investigation as yet another example of the Trump administration's extreme attempts to silence its critics. Quote, the Trump administration attack against the Southern Poverty Law Center is a direct threat to the values that make America great. In this time of unprecedented peril for our democracy, we urge all Americans of good conscience to join us as we stand up in support of the Southern Poverty Law Center. And I know you don't have time, write it. What would David Duke do differently if he was President Duke? And you know what, Jonathan? It's
Well,
shocking
it'd
because
be
absolutely niente, nothing.
it'd
And
be a
people
short
need it.
article.
It would be. It would be
I
very,
would, I would,
nothing.
I'll ask the question and then I will say nothing and it'll be
That's
a
it. That'll be it.
one word.
That's it. And then send it to the New York Times, send it to the Boston Globe. I beg you, because to make that statement is so powerful because we know who Duke is. And guess what? We have our version of Duke. We said no kings. We should have said no Duke. Which is kind of true.
But on that note, we cannot just,
Yeah.
distill this to Donald Trump.
No, I know.
He is just the headpiece to a project that
It's
is essentially,
Project
animated.
2025, it's a hydra. It has many heads. And, if you cut off this one, you still have all those other ones to deal with. If it is the last Thursday of the month, it must be race class with Jonathan Feingold. Why do we teach race class? Because we know race matters. And part of this project is to make sense of what that means. Thank you, Professor Feingold. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Arnie.
You're welcome. This, everyone, is a Thursday edition of The Attitude. We will schmooze tomorrow. Ciao.